Thanks for signing up for the 10 most common myths to the resurrection of Jesus. Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Licona, and for the next 10 days we're going to be sending you a short video dealing with one of the most common myths for the resurrection of Jesus. Today, our first day, we're going to deal with myth number 1, which is contradictions in the Gospels. The Gospels contradict themselves, and so therefore we can't believe it on the resurrection of Jesus. Now, a lot of skeptics raise this, but no credible historian believes that contradictions within an account discredit the account itself. For example, when the Titanic sank in 1912, there were some survivors that said the Titanic broke in half prior to sinking, while others said, she went down in one piece. Well, how do you get that wrong? I don't know. Here you got a ship that's a little over 800 feet long. It's all lit up and screams are coming from it. You're out there in a lifeboat looking on. How do you get that wrong? We really don't know. However, one thing's for sure. Historians didn't conclude that the Titanic didn't sink. We just knew that there was a peripheral detail for which we couldn't know what really happened. So even if the Gospels contain some contradictions, and I wouldn't say that they do, I think that these, for the most part, are easily harmonizable and explained. But even if they did, these differences in the Gospels are in the peripheral details. They're not in the core account, which the Gospels agree that Jesus died, was buried by Joseph of Arimathea, and was raised on the third day and appeared to others. So contradictions really don't do anything to discredit the account. Now tomorrow we're going to deal with our second myth for the resurrection of Jesus, and that has to do with parallels in pagan religions, parallels of dying and rising gods. Now if you want to know more about this, we've developed a 5-session course on the resurrection of Jesus where we get into a whole lot of details. You can order that course by clicking on the link at the bottom. We invite you to do that, and we're going to be discussing a whole lot of information in those. I'm Mike Licona. Look forward to talking with you tomorrow. Thank you, and welcome back to the 10 most common myths about the resurrection of Jesus. Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Licona, and we're discussing these 10 most common myths. Today is myth number 2, which deals with pagan parallels in the mystery religions. How can it be that you have so many accounts of dying and rising gods and heroes within pagan accounts? Isn't Christianity just another example of this? Well, a lot has been said about this over the years, but today, virtually unanimous consensus of scholars who study the subject agree that virtually all of these possible parallels postdate the Gospel. So if anybody is copying off another, who is it? It appears that the pagans are copying off the Christians. Another thing we could say is that a lot of the examples that we find on the internet within these pagan examples are false. Like for the example, you find the common claim that Krishna was crucified and rose from the dead. And yet I remember talking to Edwin Bryant, at Rutgers University, a leading historian on Krishna, and he said there are no accounts, period, of Krishna being crucified or rising from the dead 3 days later. And so a lot of these are just mistaken things. A third thing we can say is that you've got to show a causal connection, that there is a connection between the parallels, because you can find parallels in virtually anything. We're all aware of a plane that took off early one morning from Massachusetts and just after 9 a.m. flew into the tallest skyscraper, one of the tallest skyscrapers in the world in New York City between the 78th and 80th floors, and killed everyone on board and many people working in the building at the time. Yeah, of course, that is the B-25 that flew into the Empire State Building on July 28th, 1945. What? You didn't know about that? Yeah, it really happened. But that doesn't mean that 9/11 didn't happen, although those details are so similar. So you can find striking details in a lot of different things, but you have to show there's a connection between them rather than just being freak coincidences. So if you want to learn more about the resurrection of Jesus, we have a self-study course that you can go through for individuals or groups available for purchase at the link that you'll see at the bottom of this screen. That's myth number 2. Tomorrow we're going to be dealing with myth number 3, which is fraud. The disciples stole the body and lied about the appearances. Hi, this is Dr. Mike Licona, and this is day number 3 that deals with the 10 most common myths about the resurrection of Jesus. Today we're dealing with the fraud theory, which states that the disciples stole the body and lied about the appearances. Is this possible? I don't know of a single credible scholar today who holds this view, and for very good reason. For the most part, scholars today acknowledge that Jesus' disciples had experiences that convinced them that Jesus had been raised from the dead and had appeared personally to them. The fact that they were willing to die for these convictions shows that they were not only reporting or proclaiming it, they actually believed it. Think about this for a moment. You might have someone die for a known lie, but everybody dying for a known lie? Muslims die, the Muslim terrorists die for a cause that they believe is true. They're very sincere about that cause. In the same way, the Christians, early Christians, and even Christians today die for what they believe is true. The disciples, on the other hand, were dying for what they knew was true or false. And liars make poor martyrs. So we can know that the disciples actually believed that Jesus had been raised from the dead and had appeared to them. Moreover, we know that the Apostle Paul converted to Christianity because he had an experience that he believed was an appearance of the risen Jesus. Since he had been persecuting Christians and consenting to their execution, it's inexplicable why he would convert to Christianity and lie about the appearances. So we've developed a 5-session course in which you can study it on an individual basis or in a group. And some of the topics we're discussing within that course that you can order deals with how do historians actually investigate claims and how would we apply this to the resurrection of Jesus? What are the best sources to look at? Why even deal with the Gnostic Gospels? What about them? Can we know anything about them? So those are the kind of things we're going to be looking at. That's myth number 3. Tomorrow we're going to be dealing with myth number 4, which concerns hallucinations. Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Licona, and we're dealing with the 10 most common myths pertaining to the resurrection of Jesus. Today we are on myth number 4, hallucinations. Could it be that the disciples, because they were so grief-stricken, what are a lot of people when they're grief-stricken? They turn to the bottle, they get drunk. There were hallucinogenic drugs back in the first century. Maybe there was another reason they called Jesus the Most High God. So maybe they were grief-stricken, they took to the bottle, they took to drugs, they experienced these grief hallucinations, they thought they were appearances of Jesus, so they hallucinated and were convinced that he was raised from the dead. Well, hallucinations, the most current research shows that there are a number of modes in which people experience hallucinations. A hallucination is something that you perceive with the natural senses that isn't really there. So maybe you hear something, or you see something, you taste, smell something, or you feel you're in motion, or you feel something is touching you. Now, usually you'll experience these in a single mode, not a dual mode or a combination mode. The group most likely to experience a hallucination are senior adults bereaving the loss of a loved one. But even these, only 7% of them experience a visual hallucination. Now consider this. The reports we have say that not one, not two, but all 100% of Jesus' disciples experienced a visual appearance of Jesus. This is unthinkable in terms of what we know about hallucinations. It also doesn't explain the appearance to Paul. Jesus would have been the last person in the world that he would have wanted to see. So the hallucination hypothesis suffers from a lot of problems. There are many more that I just haven't had a chance to discuss. Tomorrow we're going to be dealing with the objection or the myth that you can't prove the resurrection because it's a matter of faith. Now, we also have a course that you can purchase called The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus. That's available to you, where we get into a whole lot more depth and details about this evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. Hi, this is Dr. Mike Licona, and we're back with you with myth number 5, common myth number 5, pertaining to the resurrection of Jesus. Myth number 5 is you cannot prove the resurrection of Jesus because it's a matter of faith. When someone says this, I want to ask them, well, why is that the case? What if someone says, well, we don't believe God. We believe that we're all here by chance naturalistic processes without any divine involvement whatsoever. I'd say, well, you can't believe that. You can't prove that that's the case. It's just, you shouldn't even try to prove it because that's just a matter of faith. They'd say, well, no, it isn't, because we believe we have scientific evidence. Likewise, I'd say, well, I believe we have historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. And when you subject that historical evidence to strictly controlled historical method, the resurrection of Jesus is not only the best explanation, it is by far the best historical explanation for the known historical data. Now, if you're interested in some more data on this or a lot more evidence, we have developed a short 5-session course called The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus on DVD that you can order by clicking on the link below. And this will give you a whole lot more information. You can use as an individual study or in small group study. Now, this was number 5. Tomorrow, we're going to be dealing with objection number 6. Jesus didn't really die. Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Licona, and welcome back to the 10 most common myths of the resurrection of Jesus. Today we're looking at myth number 6, the apparent death theory, that Jesus really didn't die. Could it be that Jesus was believed dead and mistaken to be dead on the cross, but he really wasn't? And they took him off the cross, they put him in a tomb or somewhere, and he was revived by the coolness of the tomb, came out, showed himself to others, and they believed that he was alive and resurrected. There's a couple problems with this. Number one is our understanding of crucifixion shows that the chances of someone surviving the event are very, very small. Medical understanding of crucifixion shows very unlikely to survive the ordeal. In fact, there's only one account in antiquity of someone surviving crucifixion, and that is Josephus, who reports 3 of his friends crucified. He sees these. He goes to his friend, the Roman commander Titus, who orders that all 3 be removed alive and provided the best medical care Rome had to offer. In spite of this, 2 of the 3 still died. So even if Jesus had been removed prematurely and medically assisted, his chances of survival were very small. To complicate the matters, there is no reports of Jesus being removed while alive or provided any medical care whatsoever, much less Rome's best. So the problem with the apparent death theory is there's not a shred of evidence for it. And even if Jesus had survived, would he be able to convince his disciples that he had been resurrected in an immortal, glorious, powerful body? No, they would have said, alive, yes, but resurrected, no way. And so these reasons and some others are why no widely respected scholar in the world today holds or posits that Jesus survived his crucifixion. That's myth number 6. Tomorrow we'll be dealing with myth number 7, legend. You can order a small group session, or for individuals, a DVD that you can order at the bottom of the page by clicking a link. And if you order within the next 30 minutes, we'll guarantee that you'll receive the exact same product at the exact same price. Talk to you tomorrow. Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Licona. Welcome back to the 10 most common myths pertaining to the resurrection of Jesus. Today we're covering myth number 7, that the accounts of Jesus' resurrection were merely a legend. In other words, what really happened we may not know. Maybe Jesus died, maybe that was it and nobody heard anything. And then legends about a resurrection develop much later, and this is what we're reading about in the Gospels and in Paul's letters. The problem with this is that we have reports that go back to the original apostles. For example, in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul talks about the resurrection of Jesus, that he died, was buried, rose, and appeared to others, several of whom he knew, like Peter and James. Moreover, people who knew the disciples said that Paul was teaching the correct things regarding the message of truth, the gospel. And so we know Paul was teaching what the Jerusalem apostles were teaching, that Jesus died, rose from the dead, and appeared to others. So this goes back to the eyewitnesses themselves. You can accuse them of lying or hallucinating or whatever you would accuse them of, but a legend can't happen because it was the original apostles of Jesus who were making the initial proclamation that Jesus had been raised and had appeared to them. Now, if you want to know more about this, we have a DVD that we've created, and on that DVD called The Case for the Resurrection of Jesus, we do deal with a lot of naturalistic explanations, or several of the most common ones today. And we also deal with things that we can establish as historical facts. So there's a lot we're going to cover in there, and you can order that DVD by clicking on the link that you see at the bottom. That's myth number 7. Tomorrow we deal with myth number 8, and that is that science proves that resurrections do not occur. Hi, this is Dr. Mike Licona, and this is number 8 of the 10 most common myths pertaining to the resurrection of Jesus. And myth number 8 is that science proves that resurrections cannot occur. What do we say to this? Well, science does prove that the dead do not return to life by natural causes. I don't think anybody will dispute that. But does that prove that Jesus could not have been raised from the dead? The problem is that if Jesus was raised from the dead, it's in a different reference class. No one was claiming that Jesus was raised by natural causes. The claim is that God raised Jesus. And if God exists and wanted to raise Jesus, well, then that's a game changer. That makes things differently. It's kind of like this. Let's just apply it to walking on water. Let's suppose that we could take the 7 billion people who live on the earth today, tell them to march across a lukewarm swimming pool. Well, they're all going to sink, aren't they? No one can walk on water. Let's suppose that we take a 3-year-old boy and we tell him, go ahead, you're last. Why don't you try to walk on water? He says, I can't do it. Nobody else has. 7 billion people couldn't. Well, give me your hands. What? Give me your hands. And I hold him, his hands, put him over the water. I say, go ahead, start walking on water. And then I walk along the side of the swimming pool holding him, and he walks on water. You can see that 7 billion people not being able to walk on water doesn't establish a prior probability that this 3-year-old boy couldn't walk on water. Well, wait a minute, Mike. That's cheating because you are an external agent who assisted him in that. That's right. And if God exists and wanted to raise Jesus, 100 billion people dying and staying dead does not do anything to establish a prior probability that God could have raised Jesus from the dead if he wanted to. And remember, Jesus being raised from the dead is a little bit different than someone, just a normal person being raised. Jesus made claims to being God's divine Son and said that his resurrection would be that proved who he was. So science has only proved that dead critters stay dead apart from an act of God. It doesn't prove that God couldn't raise Jesus from the dead. That's number 8. Tomorrow we're going to be dealing with the 9th common myth of the resurrection. There's just not enough evidence to establish it. If you want some more information on a more comprehensive dealing with this, you're welcome. We invite you to order the DVD at the link at the bottom of this page. Hi, this is Dr. Mike Licona, and we're looking at the 10 most common objections to the resurrection of Jesus. Today we're looking at objection number 9. There's just not enough evidence to support the conclusion that Jesus was raised from the dead. Well, I beg to differ with that. When we look at something like, say, the existence of Caesar Augustus and some of the things that he did, Augustus is regarded as Rome's greatest emperor. Do you know that we have, historians rely on 6 chief sources, ancient sources, to tell us about the life of Caesar Augustus? The first is a funerary inscription that's written at the time of his death, and it's less than 4,000 words. The other 5 are dated 90 to 200 years later. When we come to Jesus, our chief sources would be the four canonical Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, four biographies of Jesus written within 20 to 65 years of Jesus' death. Moreover, we know someone who knew the Jerusalem apostles, was well acquainted with them, and himself claims to be an eyewitness of the risen Jesus, and that's Paul. And he's writing as an eyewitness. So we have some very early sources, multiple independent sources. So we have a lot when it comes to the resurrection of Jesus. And when we subjected to the typical criteria for the best explanation, the resurrection hypothesis is by far the best explanation for the historical data, and thus we should regard it as an event that occurred in history. This is not a failure of nerve. We do have enough evidence to show that Jesus was raised from the dead. If you'd like more information or you'd like to study this more in detail, we have a DVD, a course that we've studied or set up for you. That's 5 sessions that you can go through. And this is available for purchase by clicking the link at the bottom of your page. Tomorrow, we're going to be dealing with our final common myth to the resurrection of Jesus, and that is, what about those lost Gospels? What do they have to say about the resurrection of Jesus? Hi, this is Dr. Mike Licona, and we're looking at the 10 most common myths pertaining to the resurrection of Jesus. Today we're taking a look at myth number 10, and that has to do with the lost Gospels. Those lost Gospels like the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Peter, the Gospel of Philip, the Gospel of Mary. Don't these talk about the resurrection in a different way? Like, for example, in the Gospel of Thomas, it refers to Jesus' resurrection as either immaterial or simply as enlightenment. So what do we deal with this? Why would we accept the New Testament literature while rejecting resurrection of Jesus and resurrection as it's presented in the Gospel of Thomas and some of these others? Well, for one, the Gospel of Thomas is believed by many to have been written in the late part of the 2nd century. Some scholars of the more rather skeptical stripe like to put it in the late 1st century. Most put it around the middle of the 2nd century. There's a lot of debate going on about when Thomas was written, but here for me is the killer. Despite when the Gospel of Thomas may have been written, or no matter how early it may have been, scholars of Jesus looked and tried to determine, just like with the canonical Gospels, they applied to the Gospel of Thomas, on what Jesus actually said and did. What can we prove, historically speaking, about the sayings and deeds of Jesus? Resurrection is only mentioned twice in the Gospel of Thomas, in saying number 37 and in saying number 51. One of them talks about the resurrection as being enlightenment, the other as disembodiment. But what's really interesting is that not even the radical fellows of the Jesus Seminar regard either of these sayings of Jesus as authentic sayings from Jesus, that they're later inventions put in there. So actually the Gospel of Thomas doesn't tell us anything pertaining to the resurrection of Jesus, and this would have been the earliest of those lost Gospels. So what we find is that the New Testament literature provides us with the very best information on what the early Christians claimed and believed pertaining to the resurrection of Jesus. It's been nice being with you for these 10 sessions. If you'd like more to get a lot more in depth with learning about the resurrection of Jesus, go ahead and order the Case for the Resurrection of Jesus DVD by clicking on the link at the bottom of this screen. I hope you enjoy it. It's been great being with you these last 10 days.